There's been no shortage over the years of movie tie-in games. Some games, like Die Hard and Nakatomi Plaza, focused on telling the story of the movie just from a slightly different perspective, whereas other games like Star Trek Generations focused on telling a completely different story. And then some games, like 2004's Bad Boys Miami Takedown, focused on extending the movie's story and delivering something familiar yet new. Welcome, my name's AZDash and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. If there's one movie genre I love, it's action movies from the 80s and 90s. The type that contains a lot of over-the-top action and explosions, a questionable but serviceable plot, and often Steven Seagal, Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Will Smith. One movie which fits this bill perfectly is 1995's Bad Boys, a movie that didn't just feature over-the-top action, but also mixed in a degree of comedy, helping to make it a very entertaining watch from start to finish. It's also an interesting case of a movie that was reviewed fairly poorly by critics, but went on to be a critical financial success. I think part of the reason for the less than brilliant reviews was that in isolation, many of the production and story decisions in the movie are average at best. However, when you actually sit down and watch it in a single sitting, it all kind of comes together. With critical financial success came a sequel, Bad Boys 2, released in 2003, and delivered a fairly familiar formula to that found in the original. Ironically, Bad Boys 2 was critically reviewed even more harshly than the first. However, just like the first movie, it went on to be a financial success, even beating out Pirates of the Caribbean on debut at the box office. Like with the original, with financial success came an order for a third and ultimately fourth movie, along with a spin-off television series called LA's Finest. However, the sole video game based on the Bad Boys franchise, Bad Boys Miami Takedown, is marketed as a direct sequel to Bad Boys 2, with the game even being referred to as simply Bad Boys 2 in some regions. Whatever name the game was known as, it was ultimately released on PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and PC. We're playing the PC version here, running in Windows XP compatibility mode with a community widescreen patch. As always, I'll drop a link to this patch in the description. While the game is not currently available on digital storefronts, there are plenty of copies available from online marketplaces. As far as the story goes, look, I'm going to be honest here, I've played the game, examined the box and read the manual, and still don't think I could provide an accurate representation of what the actual story is about. Some time ago I covered another third-person action-adventure game called El Matador and criticised its ridiculous plot as poorly executed and forgettable. However, at least I could explain what the plot was actually about. What I can tell you is that the game picks up directly after the second movie and attempts to tell somewhat of a semi-connected story to the movie. The problem is that the game assumes the player has extensive knowledge of the movie to the point that there is virtually zero character exposition or development. For all of El Matador's flaws, it did do a good job of at least setting the scene for who's who. Bad Boys just assumes you've recently watched the movie and proceeds straight into the first act. From here, the game tells a very disjointed story by trying to introduce too many things without ever taking the time to flesh any of them out, in turn providing very little opportunity for any real emotional investment in the story. About the only thing I can say for certain about the story is that there is one, but that it's not very good. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's take some cover, drop some enemies, and head back to 2004 to remember Bad Boys Miami Takedown. The release of Max Payne in 2001 really set the benchmark for third-person action games, not just because of the introduction of bullet time, but because it presented a gripping narrative in a well-realized world with very refined core mechanics. In the years following Max Payne's release, there were a lot of games which attempted to replicate what Max Payne delivered, but ultimately fell short, with the release of Max Payne 2 in 2003 being what I consider the first game that really captured the magic from the original. One of the things which contributed to Max Payne's success was very good camera and control, two things which are absolutely essential to get right in any third-person game. Unfortunately, in the case of Bad Boys, both camera and control fall well short of not only the benchmark, but delivering any type of cohesive system to support player control. While the basics of these systems are barely serviceable, how they interact with other core mechanics and level design is at times dire. As soon as you begin the game, you're introduced to the core combat loop of Bad Boys, taking cover at certain pre-selected locations and then leaning out to eliminate enemies, occasionally walking through areas to clear them. The first thing that struck me was how sensitive the mouse control was, so I headed into the options and turned down the sensitivity, assuming that with a lower sensitivity, things would be more precise, only they weren't. Frustrated, I went into the menu once again and turned down the sensitivity even lower, but was still faced with an issue of inaccuracy. After some rudimentary testing, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't just the sensitivity, but the acceleration of the mouse control, something which there is no option to change. It's something that you do kind of adjust to as the game progresses, but honestly, it never really felt right throughout the entire adventure. Now, I mentioned that cover is an important part of the combat loop, and it is, with the player very likely to meet a quick demise if they stay out of cover for too long in any enemy-dense area. The problem is that the game is hard-coded that only some items can be used as cover, with very little consistency between them. For example, one dumpster might not be able to be used as cover, but another identical dumpster is able to be used just fine. This inconsistency creates a lot of frustration because entering an area you never really know what can be used for cover until you approach it. Imagine if Max Payne featured only certain rooms that you could use bullet time. That's the experience you get here. When you are able to take cover behind something, you need to hope that there is no other level geometry nearby your cover position, because if there is, the camera will pan behind that instead of the player, forcing you to stay out of cover to both spot and shoot enemies, effectively defeating the entire point of the cover mechanic. Even things like basic traversal are far from ideal, with the player not even being able to jump, forcing the player to rely on the game's other questionable mechanics simply because they can't scale a 3-foot crate. Closely tied to camera and control is combat, and this delivers another questionable experience, with baffling design decisions undermining what is arguably decent gunplay. Firstly, the good. All of the weapons are quite unique and well suited to different use. There's a pistol which the player starts most missions with, and then the ability to pick up other weapons such as shotguns, SMGs, or assault rifles, with the player only being able to hold one extra weapon at a time. There are also grenades, but given the wind-up time required to use them, they are not overly practical. Included as part of the combat is the concept of disarming and arresting enemies, which is accomplished by shooting a weapon out of their hand and then waiting for them to disappear. The problem is, this mechanic is just at odds with the otherwise fast-paced action the franchise and game demand. Oh, and if you shoot them once you have disarmed them, that's counted as an execution, which I accidentally did several times, owing to not realizing I'd actually disarmed them. Outside of this one feature, the enemy AI is poor to say the least, with them often taking cover behind invisible objects or just being content to be shot at without reacting. However, the most frustrating part of combat is cheap enemy placement. There are multiple times in the game where just opening a door will lead to guaranteed damage, and this is just a terrible mechanic for any game that should be skill-based. The game does feature several bosses, and these are all devoid of any type of unique mechanics, instead only requiring the player to move between cover and shower the boss in bullets until their life bar is exhausted. The environment and level design is quite well realised, and if you can somehow forget about all of the other camera control and combat issues, it's actually quite an interesting world to navigate, and almost makes me think that Bad Boys would have worked better as a first-person shooter than as a third-person one, although even with a good environment, the game manages to layer unnecessary frustration into it. There's a section about halfway through the game, where midway through a level, you enter an area which has toxic gas and are given 1 minute to find a gas mask, or you die. The problem is that this gas mask isn't exactly signposted, and if you die, you return to the start of the level, not just the gas sequence. It took me several attempts until I was finally able to find the gas mask, and I had to play through the same area over and over before I reached this area each time. I think a checkpoint at the start of the gas area would have been a fair compromise, but what's here just invites frustration. Another level has you responding to a bank heist, which sees the player need to clear out a bank lobby. Only once you clear out the lobby, there isn't an obvious path forward until you realise you need to walk outside to trigger a cutscene, which then unlocks a new area. I just don't understand how this could have passed through playtesting without it coming up as confusing. For those who do endure the campaign, there are a range of secrets unlocked by finding special items like evidence hidden throughout the level, and in a rare bright spot, you do get a humorous overview at the end of each act depending on how much of this evidence you have collected.
Good job, boys. You stopped the bank raid and didn't do too much damage. I'm impressed. Though I would guess it's an aberration. Are you two feeling okay? You guys came up just about empty in the evidence department. Not that I'm criticizing, but the prosecutors are funny that way. They like proof, you know.
But given the challenges with the basics, I wasn't even focused on collecting the secrets. Instead, I was purely focused on reaching the end credits as soon as possible. Bad Boy's presentation stretches from impressive to poor, with a few examples of things which are simply broken. The art direction is overall pretty good, if a touch on the simple side. However, there are a lot of little details hidden within the environments, like the ability to shoot fruit and it explode, or flies hanging around a trash can. These are all small things, but add to the overall immersion of the game world. The game's cutscenes are probably the strangest part of the presentation, at least on PC. The game has this kind of film grain, low-resolution filter on all of the cutscenes, and I assumed this was because it was using the same cutscenes as the console versions. Only after a quick watch of the console versions, I concluded that this wasn't the case, as they all look a lot cleaner in presentation. I don't know why the PC version looks the way it does, but I would comfortably say that the PlayStation 2 version looks far superior, and that's not something you can often say. There are also some things which are telltale signs of poor quality control. For example, each act is made up of several missions, with a quick save prompt appearing once you complete a mission. However, on the second mission of every act, instead of the saved text defaulting to yes, it defaults to no. I can't think of any legitimate reason for this apart from it being a mistake during development. Sound design is average. It's not bad, but it's not great either. The music is largely forgettable, the sound effects are serviceable but nothing really stands out, and the voice acting, while passable, quickly becomes very tiresome after you hear the same quip for the 10th time.
Pick a bad day to dick around with guns, boy!
As someone who is a big fan of the Bad Boys movies, I went into Miami Takedown with a belief that even if it wasn't the best game, I would still enjoy it. That belief eroded some 10 minutes into my playthrough, and despite some bright spots in the game's roughly 6-hour campaign, never fully returned. The idea of playing as two hotshot police officers tackling crime in Miami with varied weapons and a cover system sounds like a good idea. Unfortunately, in the case of Bad Boys, while all of the ideas for the game are good, the actual execution is not. Developer Blitz Games would go on to develop several other games based on television and film properties, until finally being dissolved in 2013, with their website now serving as a bit of a museum of their past games. Developing games based on other media is always a high-risk, high-reward market. Expectations will always be high when people have a preconceived idea about how things should look and play. When developers get this right, they have a very large audience to cash in on. However, when they get it wrong, they have a very large audience to disappoint. Bad Boys Miami Takedown is not the worst game I've ever played, but it's far from the best, and is likely only to appeal to the most die-hard franchise fans. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.